as if it froze for a second. So good morning and good to see everybody. It's morning for us in Spain and for me in Johannesburg, but I know it's all sorts of different times for the rest of you. So thank you again. All the committees been behind. We have done quite a bit of prep, Tom. We've got Tom and his team with us. So we've done our prep session last week where we just sort of thought through the observations, and we got feedback from our observers and so on. So I think we sort of all ready to go. I'm going to just firstly say very welcome to Tom and to Jim Dalkin, the CAG chair, and I don't see Willie. Willie, are you here?
Willie's not joining us, as I told.
Is he not joining us? I thought I didn't see his face or his name.
James is here now.
Okay, but welcome to two of you, and James, of course. And I cannot say anything further before. I think we need like a little virtual hand of applause that the exposure draft is out. Well done, Tom.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's approved, but not fully out yet. But I think the approval is probably the biggest thing to get across the line. And I think it's appropriate that I'm here at the FRC, where Josephine has done such a great job leading the task force and getting it over the line. So, I just told the board the hard part starts right now, though. We have it out, and what we do with the feedback and getting the feedback is the hardest thing to do.
Yeah, that is really, really important, but I don't think you must underestimate that we should recognize that it's not a mean task to get an exposure draft out so quickly and in a state, and I'll give you like maybe 2 or 3 sentences of feedback, Tom, from our session, but in a state that our observers came back, Michael gave feedback, and we had our discussion last week as well, that there was lots of really positive progress made ended around the definitions that you've cleaned up quite nicely and the clarity of the language of the two. All of those things are, I think, really, really important steps forward. And you spoke about it. The one thing we said to ourselves, as well as the importance, is the outreach now and the engagement and the comments, and to see what comes out of that. Everybody might think it's wonderful, or people might have really very specific views or concerns. So I do think we need to recognize the journey that you're on and where you are now, but also from our side, this exposure draft and this first standard can't be all things to all people. We've spoken about group audits and all sorts of other groups, sustainability reports and all sorts of other things before, but it is important that it's got parameters around it, but that there's recognition that there will probably be things to follow in the future. So I think what I would like to do, maybe just park there for now, Tom, and we've seen your report, but get some feedback from you, and then we'll open it up for comment. We probably want to talk a little bit specifically about LCEs, but there might be other things that you want to talk about as well. I'm going to ask, as always, for the board members to hold back their hands and their comments and their questions to Tom. Let's give him some time to just work through what he wants to say, and then we'll have a discussion and we'll deal with all the comments from there. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Linda. And I want to leave a lot of time for discussion, so hopefully my opening remarks don't take too long. The other thing I would say is I avoided slides this time. I felt like everyone's inundated with materials, so you have my report. I'll take it as read, and certainly willing to answer any questions on it. Now, it's amazing to think that just this weekend I hit my 4th anniversary in this role. And, one of the things when you're working hard, it's sometimes you don't reflect, and particularly when you have moments to celebrate, you don't celebrate them. And clearly we're trying to celebrate a little bit as the board, but not get too complacent. But when I think about what we've done over the last 4 years, it's really been keyed around that strategy that we're coming up to the end of the strategy period on and consulted our new one. And that it was really all about trying to re-emphasize that the public interest has to be at the core of our work, that we needed to be taking on the key issues that really matter to fulfill the public interest, needed to be a lot more agile and really intensify our stakeholder engagement. And I think by all measures, there's quite a bit of success and there's evidence at it. First of all, we're working with you closely in terms of all the reform efforts, with James and the team too, to execute on it. I think that's a huge step forward. It probably doesn't get enough attention. It is sometimes a challenge to manage, as all things are in transition, but it is real progress, and I thank you for that partnership. I also think during that time over the last 4 years is that the way we're interacting as a board with the PIOB is really enhanced, and the level of engagement and the fact that over the 4 years, I don't think we've had any real close calls using a going concern concept of, are we going to get certification or of our standards as we get it out the door. So that's really the thing. Also, just think about what we've gotten done from a key issues perspective. We are taking on challenging issues that were languishing for some time. Fraud, going concern, LCE, were all being considered, but not necessarily addressed for some time. And they're on the agenda and making rapid progress. Going concern is already to exposure draft. Fraud is going to be approved for an exposure draft by end of the year with significant progress, and LCE will be approved in September. We could remember IAASB coordination. That was a big issue at the time. We are working, Gabrielle and me, and previously Stavros, in a very coordinated way. We just finished and approved PI phase 1 of our draft, and that's out the door. And then, of course, we've got it out in front of the game on sustainability, and we've got it more agile, which has allowed us to complete sustainability. And this level of stakeholder engagement is, if you looked at our report of the amount of touch points we've had, and I'm over here in Europe again, considering that obviously that's a big point for us in ISSA 5000 adoption, all makes sense. So let me just reflect a little bit on sustainability. So, to be clear, we just completed the exposure draft. We're putting together the explanatory memorandum that will be out for comment. Any stakeholder today could look at the exposure draft. It will not change very much. What takes a little bit of time is the explanatory memorandum and focusing the comment around key points. So we expect that probably to be released right around the end of July or the first week of August for comment, and then go into December 4th. It will be a minimum of 120 days all in. And we will have significant stakeholder interaction, which I'll get to at the end. Again, just to reflect on when we started, this really was an extraordinary effort. And so if you see Josephine as the task force chair, or my vice chair at the board, or any member of the task force and the staff, and we brought in 3 additional drafting team members from the TA project. They have just worked night and day on this project. Special shout out to Dan Montgomery, who has been a real assistant, sort of a de facto director on this project, which has really been a calm hand, steadying the staff in our work. 2 key points, and I think Linda touched upon it. This is a comprehensive end-to-end standard, overarching standard. It deals with all relevant topics about performing a sustainability engagement, but it doesn't cover every topic in a lot of detail, right? And for example, Linda mentioned group audits, or there's some of the 701 issues around CAMs. We just couldn't deal with everything all at once, and that we intend many of those issues based upon what priority is assigned to them to be picked up in subsequent standard setting. but we do think it provides a comprehensive package to do an engagement in a way that's much more directive than the current 3000 or 3410, because 3410 is a limited topic. One big element has been the focus on clarity. We had always intended that to be a big element as we got to the end. It's sort of like, let's get everything, bring all the clay together, and then we'll continue to mold it over time. We tried to make the language and definitions as clear as possible. Some of the board discussions, for those observed, that may have seemed quite detailed and tedious, but that was because we've understand what our role related to the PIF is in terms of clarity. But a big point that I need to, in which I would hope the PIAB would be helpful with, and particularly as we convey this to policymakers and other interested parties, is that at the end of the day, it's an assurance standard. And it doesn't pretend to be anything but an assurance standard. And it will necessarily look like an assurance standard, like 3000 is, or what audit standards are too, because audit standards are just a subset of assurance standards. And our expectation is that people will perform to an even higher level than is demanded at 3000 today, because that's what investors and other state users will demand over time. And so, some of the educational material that we have doesn't appear in this need to have to maybe bridge the gap from new forms of practitioners enter the space. Won't appear in the requirements or even the application guidance, though we have quite a bit in it, but we may have to layer in an element of educational material around it. So one of the discussions, the PIOB and Gonzalo, and I think, Linda, you spoke to the FSB as well. We've been really honing in on this profession agnostic element. Profession agnostic, we are entirely committed to that. 3000 is a profession agnostic standard. So is 5000. We have tried to make language as clear as possible. However, it's going to look like an assured standard, and it's going to depend upon compliance with IAASB code or something as demanding as it, or QM requirements or something as demanding as that as well. Of course, regulators will determine what as demanding as means. And clearly, this is an area we're going to get a lot of feedback on. So we know it's not the final product. We're going to consult on it. That's the whole purpose. Remember, one of the things about agility is not letting perfect be the enemy good. Get feedback quickly when you feel like it's ready for the marketplace. We felt it was right in the marketplace, and I hope you will encourage everyone to participate. Let me just quickly go to our outreach plan. Michael sat through some of the discussions on it, and it's been a real focus on my effort, because we don't want to be surprised by the comment letters. The idea is to know pretty much everything that's in the marketplace before the comment letters come in. That will enable us to more rapidly analyze the comment letters, which we will do in as rigorous and fashion as we always do. But again, it's not to get a surprise. And so our goal is to have a comprehensive global effective outreach during the process of comment that gets real and substantive input and achieves the goal of giving the standards more legitimacy, because we're going to engage with the broadest range of stakeholders, not just the accounting practitioner community. So we have a four-pronged approach to stakeholder engagement. This includes, in the first phase, virtual awareness raising and information sharing. If you haven't seen yet, for like a going concern, we've posted a number of videos about our ED. We're going to do similar work on that, on sustainability, as soon as the standard gets out and we can focus people. We're going to do global roundtables that we sponsor in Europe, North America, Asia, Oceania, and Africa, in Latin America. We also will partner with national standard setters and regulators within those jurisdictions for similar events. We're going to do a lot of direct engagement with key stakeholders. We've done a full mapping of that exercise. We benefited from some external help on that. We've been asking people, if you have seen my notes to board members, to gather more names and people, and we've cataloged all of that, so that'll be part of the process. And then we've mapped also other events that are taking place that we could leverage as well and interact with stakeholders. So this is all to come. We expect significant work to benefit from these exercises. Just to give you a sense of where the roundtables will be, we're going to leverage our New York board meeting in September to do one in New York. We're going to do one in Sao Paulo, Brussels, and KL or Singapore. And then, as I said, we have plans already in Africa, Australia, Canada, and Japan to do specific events with national regulators or standard setters. So that gives you a sense of the outreach plan that will take place. A few other comments. I'll turn to going concern and fraud. As you know, going concern is out for comment. Your PI public interest issues were pretty supportive of that. I don't feel like we need to go into much detail other than we're very interested in the comment process. We expect a little bit of pushback, particularly on a few of the transparency items. We continue to hear noise about the IAASB and that, oh, we need to wait for the IAASB. I even see it a little bit in your public interest issues. We are cautioning people around it. There is zero chance that the IAASB, or a very small chance based upon their recent agenda decisions, that they will have capacity in the near future to address going concern. But that should not slow us down. And I think the way we've handled it will drive effective audits as it relates to that issue and engagement with management and those charged with governance, which is really an important ecosystem issue. On the fraud side, we did our first complete review of the standard. We had been dealing with bits and pieces throughout the last few months, but we joked, it's like putting Humpty Dumpty back together again. When you take the disparate parts and put it together again, you find the need for greater clarity. And so a lot of the discussion about was, how do we make it all fit together in a more comprehensive manner? How does it interlink with other standards, particularly 315, 330, etc.? Or are we unduly repeating ourselves? The good thing, and I think the most important thing, is that we're not going back on any of our commitments. I felt like the board was holding pretty firm with its agenda decisions, and it really is about refining until we get to approval. The one note I make about your public interest issue on the transparency side, we are very committed to the CAM approach on this. We've discussed this in detail with regulators and other stakeholders. There would be a risk to us in terms of clarity of the auditor's report if we removed the fraud disclosures from the CAMs. That is an effective mechanism, mainly because sometimes the CAMs related to error and fraud are very interlinked. And so the signposting that we do, I think, will be useful in that regard from a transparency standpoint. And then finally, let me conclude, and then we could talk about LCE and others, which I think is ready for approval. The biggest issue we have left is on dealing with group audits, and we just haven't received the full analysis of the comments, which are happening in July, so I don't want to prejudge that discussion. I want to deal with 500. We're getting the comments back. We're also gotten comments back on our strategy as well. The way we go forward on 500 may very well take into account our strategy comments and work plan comments, because one of the initial impressions we're getting is that people would be more hopeful. We're hopeful that we would be slightly more ambitious on dealing with 500, particularly as it relates to issues of technology. Some regulators have also raised concern that we may be reducing the strength of the requirements, then we'll have to deal with that as well. But I think we may have to take a broad outlook on what next for 500 audit evidence as a result of both the comments from the exposure draft and also our strategy consultation as well. So, Linda, I hope that gives you a good overview that we're still working hard. We're not going to rest on our laurels. This is hopefully the team will get a couple of weeks of rest post the release of the exposure draft, because we are hitting August, and that was one of the side benefits of getting the exposure draft out early. But we're going to have a very busy run to the end of the year.
Thanks for that, Tom. And Tom, maybe just one other comment. We obviously discussed quite a bit of the, the other work that you've done in our when we had our preparation session. But maybe just on the LCE standard, and you alluded to the fact that you want to have it out for approval by September. I guess in a way, the organizations that don't support it most likely won't change their minds. But there were ones that had more specific concern around the scoping and so on. And I would assume you've done the necessary engagement and outreach to make sure that there's at least some level of alignment. I know that the whole scoping of that was important, but I do believe once it's out, and we had the discussion at our prep meeting, is it some stakeholder engagement to really make them understand the role and the importance and the value of the standard is probably going to be quite key in the process.
Yeah, those conversations have been occurring from day one, that we continue to engage closely with FER and IAASB on those issues. It's clear that LCE is not for all jurisdictions, particularly some of large OECD countries that have certain independent audit regulators that don't perceive the needs. But my point has always been is don't block the demand at other markets. If we got the scoping and the authority right, then in fact the proportionality of the LCE standard means that the same effective requirements on the LCE population obtained as it would be for ISAs. We've just skinning it down for the specific circumstances of the typical LCE. We've been really focused on that. At the end of the day, we're not going to convince people who have been firmly in that camp for a long time. But my point has always been there are other people that are firmly in the other camp. And what we've been trying to do from day one is to be very clear on whom the standard should apply to. And, this means that we're disappointing people who would like to expand the application of the standard to a broader group. And we're going to hear this come out in the group audit context. We're going to hear, well, you haven't considered this circumstance when a component auditor is doing this, that, and the other thing, which really is necessary. We heard one or two instances at the CAG meeting about multi-jurisdictional component auditors. And I was like, whoa, that's no longer an LCE from our standpoint. And so there are choices we make, and our hope is that we get 85 to 90% of what really is an LCE. And we've been a little bit more limited for simplicity standpoint and for ameliorating some of the concerns that regulators have had that this could spill into a population that should be used to the full ISAs.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks, Tom. And I'm going to go to Michael, who was our observer at your meeting just now, if he's got any comments, and also today from the CAG. But let me just first go to Jim to get some feedback, Jim, from the CAG side. We saw your report, but anything from your side that you would like to mention?
Thanks, Linda. Just a couple of points. One is just for everyone, you probably saw it in my report, the CAG did meet on, I believe it was June the 15th. So we did have a discussion, and that discussion was really focused on sustainability. And I think one of the key themes with respect to that was that the CAG, I would say as a whole, wanted to get the standard out in exposure. And we obviously know the IAASB has done that. But I think this will provide a good forum to at least understand or to think about how others may view the standard, if there are areas that require additional focus, but just getting it out there. And so that was an encouragement to the IAASB at the time of our June meeting. And then there are a couple key areas, one of which was greenwashing and the concern effectively for fraud and fraudulent disclosures, thinking about whether that needs some additional heft to address, was one of the points. Tom mentioned group audits, which did come up at the CAG, and I think that's been definitely one of the topics, but also some consideration of some of these what they call bridge definitions with other standard setters. Those were all some of the key areas that were talked about at our CAG meeting. But from June 15th to when the IAASB met last week, they had moved forward, and it was quite an effort, I think, to get to where they were and to get it approved shortly thereafter. So those were some of the key comments from a CAG perspective.
Thank you so much for that, Jim. I'm going to check for hands, and then, but first, over to you, Michael, if there's anything from your side.
Okay, thank you. I don't have too much to add. I agree with what Tom had to say. I think a lot of good progress made at the last meeting. There will be, I'm sure, many comments come back on ISSA 5000. And that's good because there were a number of areas where the board was looking for input and not fully settled on what's the absolute best approach at this stage. So that's great. And on fraud, very pleased to see the direction of the discussions there. Lots of focus on strengthening the requirements, clarifying them. Getting them well integrated with the other ISAs without too much duplication, I guess, is going to be a continuing challenge, but they seem to have it well in hand and going in the right direction. And on the LCEs, yes, continuing the sales process is going to be important once Part 10 is finished. But that's good. And on the listed entity and PIs, good to have track 1 approved and on track 2. So a very productive meeting.
Thanks for that, Michael. Tom, I see your hand is up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Linda, and thank you very much, Tom, for sharing us with your very significant progress in the project. I would like to end. I also welcome your comprehensive outreach plan, including Japan. I think that's your effort is very well targeted in a sense in terms of the relationship between PA and non-PA. The question I would like to ask you is, what is your observation on the impact of ISSA 5000 on the non-PA or ISO communities? Because in Tokyo, there is sort of the situation called the cohabitation of PA and non-PA. Almost the market is about 50 and 50. And then what we are currently observing is that some of the leading non-PAs would like to have allocate quite a lot of resource and effort to catch up with the ISSA 5000. And we would like to encourage that sort of effort. But at the same time, that some of the non-PAs are a little bit reluctant to go on that way, to go to the way of to become a little bit of like the external expert. In that sense, that the market is very, how can I say, important. And at the same time, the relationship, the coordination between IAASB and IAASB is very important in the sense for the external expert, use of expert project itself is very important. So perhaps it's still on the preliminary stage. And what is your contact with the ISO guys, and what is your observation on the impact of the non-PA committees? Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll deal with ISO first, and then we could talk about just more generally. So a significant amount of contact interaction between ISO, and James, feel free to come in as well afterwards. Already, particularly at the staff level to date, although our board members did participate in a call with them, and I've had some interaction with ISO as well. Same applies with accountability. With ISO, they have established a working group. We are an observer on that. We have provided all of our working papers. We have access to theirs. They are drafting heavily or building heavily, focused around what we're doing on ISSA 5000. And there will be continued interaction on that front. I think their hope is that whatever they come up in the ISO world will be consistent with our standard. I should say, though this is a policy, and this is something we discussed at the Financial Stability Board, is that regulators probably will have to make a judgment call at some point about what is demanded as, or whether there's equivalence. Otherwise, like in most things, people have to choose one standard. Like just like national standards set, IFRS has been chosen over national standards. You know, there is a value to having a single standard and having a robust standard that people could adopt. Our standard is open for use by any entity. It will require change right now for accounting practitioners as well as non-accounting practitioners. And I think understanding the current state of the market is really important. ISO practitioners are largely operating in the greenhouse gas space because that's where ISO has a standard. Our standard is meant to be for all ESG topics, whether we like, or sustainability topics. And if you see IFAC's data, non-accounting practitioners, as they move away from greenhouse gas, are using ISA 3000 as the predominant standard. So there is that dynamic at play. We hope that our standard is appropriately clear, that people can make the jump. But the reality is that people may have to just adopt a new standard. And so just like with IAASB standards, which will be a change for many people, or ESRSs as well, which will be a new standard to people. And so like, this is the balance that would be. We want a standard that is really profession agnostic. We are coordinating closely with IASB to make sure our definitions are consistent. We're hopefully will have enough material that will help people to bridge maybe a different system into ours. And we will continue to coordinate with ISO and accountability in great depth. I don't believe competition and standards is a good idea. We're not intending to compete, but at the end of the day, I support the concept of a single high-quality global standard.
Yeah. If it's okay, I'll just add in just on the interaction, and the general sense is ISO does have experience, of course, with our greenhouse gas standard, and they were close to our process when we were developing it, and they understand, I guess, the IAASB's approach to standard setting. which has a fair degree of rigor and comprehensiveness in its work, both in the requirements and in the guidance. So at least at the leadership and the practice level, they're familiar with this. So I think that was the biggest challenge when thinking through how they might approach their general assurance standards. Now, I think the marketplace, and it's a great question, Tom, I think it's very difficult to predict how that marketplace dynamic will play out in terms of the decisions. And I do think it'll become an economic one. It is about the level of investment that's going to be required by the practitioners, their expected return from that field, and they're going to compete on quality as all of the assurance providers. So that's a difficult one, which again, I think if they understand the 3000 journey, they understand that choice. I don't know if we can predict that, but it is putting out a level playing field. At least there's clarity around what is being expected. And I think the other element is the ISO environment, as you know, is a dual environment in where you've got providers that assist in the internal processes of management, and you've got your assurance providers. And again, perhaps not so much as the firms because they've got more of the division. In the ISO community, that will be a natural a business choice, I think, as they move forward. It may become more acute, and so you may see some impacts, but I think it already exists today. All it will do is maybe make the need for a choice to undertake. Hope that's helpful, at least personal observation about the dynamic that you're inquiring.
Thank you very much for your input. And at the same time, come back to perhaps the external expert issue will arise after the issue. So the coordination concerning the ISA 620 might be very important as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. I'm going to go, maybe Tom, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Philippe and to Janine and take their comments and then circle back to you if that's okay with you. Philippe.
Thank you very much, Linda. And Tom, thank you for your presentation. And congratulations to you and your team for the delivery of this exposure draft, which is very impressive. I only have one question at this stage, Tom. I understood that now that this exposure draft has been published, you want to get it approved rapidly. So, which means that you have performed with your team a deep analysis of the different set of laws and regulations in different countries to be sure that there is compatibility and harmony. So my question is based on your first discussions, your tour, your presentations. What are the comments, the main comments that you expect from Europe, from the European Commission and some European countries?
Thanks, Philippe. Janine?
Yes, thank you, and hello everyone, and thank you, Tom, for your presentation and update on all the projects. That's very helpful, and of course also congratulations to you and the team with this accelerated exposure of the ISA 5000 draft, which is really great achievement. So a lot of thanks for that and compliments. I have a question around the September meeting, actually, where the LCE standard is going to be an important item. And I was wondering, since you explained a little bit still that there are some regulators that have second thoughts about it because of their fear that it will maybe also have an adverse impact on the on confidence actually in the general audit report based on the full suite of ISAs, those kind of considerations that regulators may have. And my question is, are you planning to do anything the coming months, so before the September meeting, to sort of ease all these feelings a little bit amongst those regulators that you're aware of that are still having second thoughts about it. And my other question is a practical one. You were talking about roundtables also in New York around the IAASB meeting in New York in September. When will it be known when it will be? Is it foreseen to be in the same week, or since you have now 4 days instead of 5 days IAASB meeting? Curious whether it can be combined with my attendance or not when I'm in New York, because I think it would be helpful to also have somebody attending one of these roundtables. Thanks.
Okay. Let me address Philippe's question first. So what are the comments for the EU countries and the European Commission? Philippe, so we've been in intense regular dialogue with the European Commission and many of the EU member states and the regulators throughout the whole process. So we think what we've done is highly responsive to things that matter in terms of ESRS adoption and CSRD in Europe. We have really bolstered the elements of our document as it relates to double materiality. We've dealt with a lot more guidance as it relates to the practitioner's report, sustainability practitioner's report. So a number of the things, issues of fraud and greenwashing that Europe cares about. But ultimately, the process of getting feedback will continue now. In fact, tomorrow I will be in Paris. I'm meeting with H3C tomorrow to see how responsive we've been to their concerns. And then the next day I have a meeting in Brussels with the European Commission staff who have been observers throughout our whole process. They are a formal observer to the IAASB, and for the first time in over a decade, they've been participating at the table again in our event. So, and then we have an event with the Accountancy Europe that they're helping to organize on Wednesday afternoon, where we'll get more stakeholder input as well. So a lot is happening in terms of getting feedback. We will have a very focused outreach effort in Europe, and hopefully we are sufficiently responsive while remaining global in approach as well. So our clear goal is to have Europe, even if they need to embellish upon our baseline, to be the approach used for assurance. And hopefully we've created something that could at least be the starting point. As it relates to Janine, from a roundtable standpoint, yes, it would be right in the middle of board week. We actually have 4 days scheduled for board meetings, but one of those 4 days will be the roundtable day. We actually don't have a need to meet for 4 business days when we think about what we have on the agenda for September. And while I had all the board members in the room and already traveled to North America, I thought it was the right opportunity to do a roundtable, even if not everyone's going to sit at the table for it, so people could listen and hear the texture of what's happening. So no need to stay any extra days. It's about being efficient with our time and our money to do it and bringing people to New York. In terms of the LCE standards, the dialogue with regulators is ongoing. I don't know how much more there is to do other than to continue the dialogue with IFVR and others who have a role. But at the end of the day, jurisdictions will have to determine that on their own on whether to use the standard or not. But the clear, I hope the threshold for the way people think about the standard can't be universal support. Just like with IFRS for SMEs, some jurisdictions will choose to use it up front, some jurisdictions will not. Some of the jurisdictions that don't use it up front will look to the experience of others to see whether any of the bad effects have manifested what they suspect. And others will see that it's been a success and not caused any trouble in the marketplace and then choose to adopt. And others may just decide it's not for them. All of that would be fine for me. But you know, I would say some of the positions on this issue are so ingrained right now. And one of the hard things about being a chair of any organization is that you have to make decisions that won't please everyone all the time. I feel like we've been very responsive to some of the regulators who don't like our LCE standard on every other issue out there. And, you know, I hope they'll see that we made our decisions for a legitimate reason based upon sound evidence. And we'll continue to have good dialogue with them. But at the end of the day, they may choose to disagree. And, you know, I think that's where we are with the number of regulators, and others will be less than satisfied with that outcome.
Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. Robert, before I go to you, I just quickly want to circle back to Dave. I promised him a chance to speak, having observed the CAG, but I never gave it to him. So back to you, Dave, and then I'm going to go to Robert.
Great, thanks, Linda. And actually, this last CAG I didn't observe. I think Sandy observed that one, and I don't see her on. But just a couple of thoughts. I'll just, Tom, add my congratulations to everybody else's on the status of 5,000, because that's just remarkable, and certainly the sooner you can get it out and start gathering that feedback, the better, because there's still, as you pointed out, a lot of work ahead. And you know, you gave a good summary on fraud, and you know, we've had a few questions on the LCE standard. And I agree with what you just said about the LCE standard, and that there may be some diversity in how this gets accepted. It would be nice, it seems to me, it would be nice to know that in certain jurisdictions where these audits are very common, that we have confidence that it will be accepted in some of those jurisdictions, so that it will be tried and tested. And I guess I don't know if we have any sense for whether or not that will happen, whether it's in, you know, the Nordic countries or in Africa or in different parts of the world. And it would, to me, I guess the outcome you wouldn't want to have is to issue a standard and then nobody adopts it, which would just be a disappointment. And I do think this has the opportunity to really improve the quality of those audits at the smaller end of the marketplace.
And it's probably a good time to go to Robert, because Robert, in our prep session, you made I don't know if that's why you put your hand up, but maybe you want to make the comment about your experience from your part of the world with the LCE standard, and then obviously your other comments as well. Thanks, Robert.
Yeah, thank you, Linda, and hello to everyone. Hello, Tom, Jim, James. Just some brief comments really, just on that last point. Yes, it's interesting in this part of the world, Tom, to see the evolving thinking about the adoption of the LCE standard. I think there's been some anxiety that in jurisdictions that regard themselves as being ISA jurisdictions as to whether a decision not to adopt the standard will mean that they're no longer fully ISA compliant. And as I understand it, that's not going to be the case. It's going to be optional. But there does seem to be some, as the standard is now developing, and all of that sort of angst that happens during the course of standard setting starts to dissipate, and people start to get more used to the idea. I'm sensing that there is more openness to adoption, but I certainly agree with Dave. And you may have a comment, response on Dave's question. It would be very helpful just to know from some of those jurisdictions, obviously within Europe and the Nordic jurisdictions, you may be very aware of that, but in some of the jurisdictions like Sri Lanka, for example, where that was one of the drivers of starting the project, what the feedback is on that. But look, I just generally wanted to endorse what's been said about the LCE standard, and I think that your written report to us actually was spot on in terms of the balancing that is needing to be done in relation to everyone understanding the reasons for the board pursuing this project through to a conclusion, which the PIOB has been supportive of. I just want to look, just a very quick comment you said in your opening about the sustainability standard, and again, congratulations for getting it out. It's wonderful to see it. But you did say in your opening remarks, Tom, that the public interest is at the centre of this, and so I just want to emphasise that. I thought your analysis of the current position in relation to what does profession agnosticism, to use that term, actually mean in this context, I think was right. I think the public interest weighs heavily on us and on this board, on your board, sorry, this board and your board, in terms of understanding what this aspiration for a profession agnostic, or a standard that is available for use by professions other than the accounting profession, actually means. And we're at the point now where we need to get it out and get the evidence back and get the responses back. And you're also working very comprehensively behind the scenes with the other organisations, which is great to see. But look, I think that you're right in the sense that in the end this has to be an assurance standard, and I think James made the very good point that you have new standards all the time, and new professions that want to partake in the market will make the economic decision whether they want to gear themselves up and use it. But ultimately, I think it does have to be an assurance standard, because it has to be able to foot it with the financial audit standard, doesn't it, in an integrated reporting context, and that's and particularly where capital market decisions are involved. So that's the primary sort of driver of the public interest from the perspective of your board, and it's a question of how that is, what does it really mean to make it available to others, if you like. And so I think that's going to be the key point coming through in the in the outreach program, isn't it? I just thought I'd emphasize that point of agreeing with you on it, and you may have some response to it. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert, for that. Linda, would you like me to react? So I think this
maybe
is.
I can add one thing. Sorry, Tom. Let me just while you're talking about that point, let me maybe just add one comment. And I this whole concept of professional agnostic sort of came about a while back with some of the regulators, and I think IAASB in particular, saying that they believe the standard should be professional agnostic, which I think we all support and agree to. And as you said, I've made that comment to some of the regulators that you must also just remember this is an assurance standard. And I was thinking, and you might want to comment on it, Tom, we probably need within the PIOB to also circle back, Claudia, and think if it's necessary for us to add a public interest issue on that. So you might want to add to that, because yes, we absolutely support the concept, but it can't be written in such a layman's language that it's not an assurance standard anymore, because that's not in the public interest. It must deal with the foundation and the concepts that assurance is built on. So apologies, it was just a sort of interruption, but I would like for you to comment on that. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, on the profession agnostic stuff, I think this is one of the key policy issues and public interest issues today. There is a potential for an expectations gap, so to speak, on what we really mean by profession agnostic. If we're talking about profession agnostic, that it means that anyone and everyone could do whatever they want all the time, I just don't see how that serves the public interest at all. The way I've looked at this is that we want to expect the same type of rigor over time in terms of sustainability reporting and assurance thereof as we have on the financial reporting side. And that requires consistency in rules and approaches, so investors and other users of information understand what they're getting when they see it, and therefore can make their decisions based upon that information and trust that it's going through the appropriate reporting reporting process and assurance process. And, you know, so I think when we speak to policymakers and other interested stakeholders, it's important to drive alignment around that. We clearly believe that our assurance standards aren't assurance standards because we're promoting a particular industry or specific interest of firms. The assurance standards have developed because in the way that they have because it's a well-honed methodology or approach to getting reasonable or limited assurance on financial statements or other forms of corporate reporting. And so, you know, I really think this is an interesting discussion that the PIOB needs to be centrally involved in, or we're going to have a level of expectations gap, not in the types that we talk about at fraud and going concern, but in terms of what the outcome is. And I think that squarely fits into your mandate. On the LCE take up, yeah, obviously we hope that enough jurisdictions use our standard up front. I do see a warming in many jurisdictions to it. I would expect that there's, like we saw on IFRS for SMEs, there'll be a first wave. I would expect the Nordics, many countries that don't have robust standard setting apparatus to be quick to adopt it. But I think you'll have a second wave thereof, and then maybe some of the big skeptics over time will see it's not a problem. But you're not outside the ISA community for not adopting ISA for LCE. It's an option. It's an option, particularly where people want to have audits for non-PIs and non-listed entities out there and believe that it's valuable to have consistency in practice. Remember, in many jurisdictions where we had that were calling for the LCE standard, they were developing their own. And, you know, some of them went down to 8 pages. And, you know, I'm not sure how you drive it so much consistency in practice from that standpoint. So I feel like we haven't sacrificed quality at all. We found a proportionate solution, but maybe we'll find out more through practice over time and have to adapt as a result. And, you know, I'm hoping that some of the hardcore opposition will soften over time and have more understanding of the reason we did what we did.
Thank you so much for that, Tom, and thank you everybody for your comments, and Jim, for you and James as well. It feels like there's still lots of things that we want to discuss with you, but we will let you go and celebrate your exposure draft being approved. And clearly you're not going to have long relaxing summer holidays with all of your outreach, and Paris tomorrow is probably going to be interesting for many reasons. So good luck with all of that. And we'll definitely also circle back and go and look at how we refine our public interest issues, specifically around some of those issues that we spoke about. Thank you. I'm going to ask the board members just to remember that you need to dial off and dial into the new link for the private session with the MG. Tom, James, Jim, thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.